always there for you.
All right. Well, happy Father's Day to all you fathers, want-to-be fathers. Thankful for all of our fathers. So we got a little science project to do here. We've got actually a Frisbee course that's going in out back that we're going to share the property next door with the school. They got a big grant, so a couple of them are kind of weaving in on the back part of our property. If any of you are Frisbee golf fans, we're going to have that going in a little while. So that's kind of exciting, which made me kind of think about this. They were out practicing, and I saw this Frisbee keep getting closer and closer and closer, right? Kept getting bigger. And I was wondering why does this Frisbee keep getting bigger and bigger? And then it hit me. All right, dad jokes, right? So like, why can't you trust atoms? You know, atoms. Why can't you trust atoms? Because they make everything up. Yeah, I hear the groan. So three conspiracy theorists walk into a bar, and now that can't be a coincidence, right? You might have to think about that one. That's a thinker's one, right? So I've noticed with the temperatures going up, it's been a hot week, like our AC bill keeps going up around here. And so if you ever want to talk about why the AC bill is so high, my door is always open. All right, one more, then I'm done. All right, this is kind of a preacher/dad joke, right? Anybody need an ark? Does anybody need an ark? Know a guy. All right, let's move on. All right. So Jesus said, there's a good segue. Jesus said, all right, when he summed everything up that he wanted to teach us, he said, if you forget everything else, the one thing that defines my followers is this. He says is that they love one another. And he said, okay, and it's not just that you love one another. He said this. He says, you've got to love each other as I have loved you. Look at how I do this. Look at how I love. That's how I want you to love. And then he illustrated it by the way he lived and treated people. And so then the Apostle John, and I'm not just talking about, John the Apostle, but this was John that wrote the eyewitness account. This is John that walked and talked with Jesus. He described it like this. He said, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And literally what that means is he set up his tent with us. That's exactly what the Greek word means there. He set up camp with us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. And he's saying there again, I'm not just talking about something I heard. I saw it. I was an eyewitness of this. It came from the Father. And then this interesting phrase at the end, he says, full of grace and truth. All right, and so we kind of know what grace and truth are. Let's kind of let this illustrate grace and truth, right? Some of you, maybe came from grace and truth families. Your mom may have been grace, your dad may have been truth, or vice versa. Maybe some of you grew up with single parents. They had to kind of keep this balance together. Some of you maybe grew up with a little too much grace, right? And that's maybe why you are the way you are, right? Your clothes never match, and you don't really care. It's a little too much truth maybe some of you grew up with. Maybe you're a little too obsessive, compulsive about things, a little too wired tightly. People are trying to help you swing the other way. But when we think about grace and truth, we tend to kind of think of it kind of like this. If we try to put it together, full of grace and truth, it's kind of a mix, kind of a half and half. This is kind of how we usually kind of approach grace and truth. But what John said was, okay, no, Jesus is not like this at all. Jesus wasn't like a little bit of grace, a little bit of truth. Jesus wasn't half grace, half truth. Jesus wasn't even, one that could hold it in balance. He said Jesus was full of grace, full of truth, so that Jesus creates a whole new category for how we think about loving each other, being gracious to each other, but also holding truths together. And so Jesus teaches us very clearly that you can do both. It's not an either or, that it was all together. Jesus was not the balance of, he was the embodiment of. He created a whole new way of thinking this. Okay, and John goes on to say, if you're a Jesus follower then, that somehow you've got to aim to get here and not live here. And if you're always living here, if this is what kind of defines your life, then there's always going to be something missing. You're always going to, maybe you even grew up in one of these churches where there's going to be something incomplete, something, one way or the other, individually or as a church. And John said, the way that I figure it, the way that I saw it, if we're going to follow Jesus in this new category that he created, then we've got to figure out how to embody both grace and truth in the way that we love and treat each other. And so today I want to go to a point in Jesus' life where he didn't just model this. He did, he did this so many times. When you think about his encounters with people like the woman at the well, or the woman that was caught in adultery. You remember how he held that tension and balance. Matthew, the tax collector, when he called him to follow him. Even at the end, the thief on the cross, there was grace and truth. But this is the point where Jesus actually taught this as well. And the thing that makes this teaching so significant to me was the audience he was actually teaching it to, because he found himself on this particular day surrounded by two different groups of people. One was a group of people that felt so alienated, maybe even so dehumanized by religion and things like that. They felt so alienated from God that God would never approve of them. God would never accept them. And then there was another group in this same big, large crowd of people who felt like they were so good that God had already approved of them, that they could do no wrong. Churches, are full of both of these groups today. And Jesus looks at both of these groups and he teaches them and he realizes, okay, you're both wrong. You're both trying to do this. And so Jesus tackles this very difficult issue in his Jesus way of just kind of leaving everybody shocked. But I want you to listen to how this whole thing got started. This is found in Luke chapter 15, and I don't want you to try to get too far ahead of me if you grew up hearing the story. But the first part of this is what kind of gets to me personally, why this is so huge. Here's the first of these two groups that we're listening to in this day. Luke tells us tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. So here's the first group, and everybody hated tax collectors back then. They, if you don't know what all they did, they were like the cronies that, like, they pull up in their tricked out SUVs and some big, muscle bound, freak kind of holds the door open for them, and they could take as much money from people as they wanted, however they wanted to do it, as long as Rome got their cut, and so people just hated them. In fact, they hated them so much, according to this verse, they gave them their own category. They wouldn't even include them with the sinners, right? They were just a special kind of sinner, own category of bad. And the other notorious sinners it's talking about, this is the group that they kind of just knew that God would never approve of them because either of their role in life or because of the way people kind of categorized them or because of their lifestyle. God would never approve of them because of their morality or their ethics. And they were either sinners and they knew it, or they were just kind of tagged as sinners. Either way, though, these were people that often came to listen to Jesus. Now stop and think about that, okay? These were the people that often came to listen to Jesus. That means, okay, if Jesus were like a pastor in a church and you show up in your day, the first few rows here would be full of the most notorious sinners that you could ever see. So you guys got this covered, right? You representing? That was who was up front to hear Jesus early, right? By the time you showed up, and that's way different than a lot of perceptions of churches, right? Maybe it shouldn't be, because if we get this right, okay, if we get this right, grace and truth, then this is what we'll experience. We'll embody it in a way that Jesus embodied it, and then all of a sudden everything changes. So, okay, the front row's filled with notorious sinners, right? We'll take that personal. The back row, all right, back row people, I'm picking on you if you represent, but this crowd that was in the back listening to Jesus today, here's the second group. This made the Pharisees and teachers of the religious law complain. Why? Because he's associating with such sinful people. Even eating with them. And now that's important as well, because eating with them takes it to a different level, right? Back then, to eat with somebody, that means I invite them into my home, right? I open up my life to them, which was close and personal. It wasn't even just like Jesus was tolerating these people or like, okay, well, they can come listen as long as they don't cause trouble or anything like that. No, he didn't even just accept these people. Apparently, he took time to actually hang out with these people. He affirmed these people. He invested himself in these people. And so the Pharisees, the leaders of the law, they couldn't understand why in the world would Jesus, who was nothing like them, why would people who were nothing like Jesus? And why they couldn't figure out Jesus, who was nothing like these people, he seems to like them too, yet he attracts mobs of people all the time that were nothing like him. They loved to come hear him teach. And there was so much tension there for him. And this was the main question that the religious leaders had. Does he condone their behavior? We ask this a lot of different ways too, right? Does he condone their behavior? Is he good with them? Like church folks still like asking this question. I mean, have we heard Jesus condemn them yet? When's he gonna take a stand, right? When is he gonna just come right out and say, hey, you need to quit gathering taxes like you do, and you need to quit sleeping around, you need to give up your occupation, you need to do all things right? I haven't heard him say that yet. And it seems to me, okay, if they flock to him like they do, then it must be because he condones their behaviors and he must be soft, right? And yet, okay, as Jesus begins to lean into this tension that he knows is there, it becomes clear that's not the real issue at all. So Jesus decides to begin by talking about some things that they would all agree on, because Jesus is just like he's brilliant, he's master communicator. He decides to share some stories. We call them parables. And instead of just addressing maybe what he really wants to talk about head on, he kind of steps way back, decides to get this very diverse, divided audience all on the same page, and he asks some basic questions up front that they'd all probably agree on, right? He's just brilliant. So he says this. He says, I ask him first, if a man has 100 sheep, one of them gets lost, what's he going to do? You know, common emotion. Everybody knows what it feels like to lose something. He says, won't he leave the 99 others and then go search for the one that's lost until he finds it? And so maybe for the first time even in their lifetime, these two really, really different groups of people, they're nodding together, Pharisees and sinners, like, yeah, okay, we get it, right? And then Jesus says this. He says, when he's found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. And so nervously, they're all just kind of like nodding together again. When he arrives, he'll call his friends, neighbors, saying, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. And everybody's tracking together, right? But before maybe they can raise their hand and ask him a question, he goes on, he hits them with this. He says, in the same way, there's more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. And before they can kind of start to mutter about this a little bit, he sees some women in the audience maybe, and he says this, okay, and suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And both the good women and the bad women in the audience, they're all nodding like, yeah, right? And all the husbands are going, yeah, that's exactly what she would do. In fact, she'd call me from work and make me get home early to turn that place upside down until she finds, you know, that lost coin. We're not sleeping until we find it. But because when you lose something precious, right, when you lose something important to you, it gets your undivided attention. You're more passionate about what you've lost in that moment than what you never misplaced to begin with. And so Jesus is kind of bringing this common thing together. And they all agree because everybody's lost something. And he says, okay, did you know, think about this, did you know that God, your Father, your Heavenly Father, gets more excited about a lost person, a lost sinner, someone returning into a relationship with him that wasn't in relationship with him? He gets so much more excited about that than 99 who were never lost to begin with. And while they're kind of trying to put that together, because they're like, well, we kind of think we're the 99, he dives into this familiar, more tense part of his teaching. All right, he says, let me tell you one more. A man had 2 sons. Younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So you got this older son, this younger son, maybe familiar with this story. The younger son comes to the dad almost as if to say, hey, Dad, like you just won't die already, so how about we just pretend like you're dead and you just kind of go ahead and give me the inheritance now so I can do whatever I want with it. Now this would have been so out there and offensive in any culture in our day, right? Anyone with sons, it's just like, that's the most boneheaded thing I've ever heard, right? What kind of entitled Yahoo's going to ask for something like this? But it's especially offensive to this first century Jewish culture. And then, okay, because Jesus is kind of making up this story, he can go any direction with it he wants to. He tells them something even more unbelievable. He says, so the father agreed. What? Yeah, the father agrees to divide his wealth between his sons. And I imagine, okay, at this point, you can hear a pin drop in the audience there. They're just like, where is this going? Who would do that? Well, a few days later, Jesus goes on, this younger son packed up all his belongings, moved to a distant land where he wasted all his money in wild living. Like, the town that I'm in is too small for me. I got to get to the big city. Moves where nobody would know who he was. Nobody would know what he was up to. No accountability, right? Everybody listening is probably feeling the same way listening to this story. They're all kind of starting with the same questions. And then you've probably heard the story. Jesus says then it gets worse. About that time, his money runs out. And great famine sweeps over the land. He begins to starve. And at that point, I can imagine everybody in Jesus' audience starts to think, well, yeah, okay, well, he's getting what he deserves, right? So you reap what you sow. You would assume that too, probably, if you were listening to this. So Jesus says he persuades a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his field to feed the pigs. So the young man became so hungry, even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. And so now Jesus is starting to drive this story in a Jewish culture, remember who he's talking to here, into a very ultimate extreme. A young Jewish boy taking care of pigs, that's bad enough already, thinking about eating what the pigs eat, right? And if Jesus had stopped right there, most of these people would have said, yep, that's a great story. That's the way it should be. In fact, everybody in Jesus' audience would have gone home. They talked about it around the dinner table that night. You know, their kids, let me tell you a story I heard today. Here's what happens if you don't obey your father, if you don't respect me. Here's what God's like. You reap what you sow. You get what's coming to you. What comes around goes around. That was a great sermon Jesus delivered today, right? Would have been great. And Jesus had everybody on the edge of their seat, both audiences. But he keeps going. He says when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have enough food to eat. They have more to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. So I'll go home to my father, and I'll say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy of even being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returns home to his father. Okay, now you're in the audience. Everybody's listening. Everybody's going, okay, this is going to be good. I thought the story should have ended, when he was just kind of getting what he deserved there, feeds the pigs, but this is going to be even better, right? Because everybody in this audience knew what they would do if this was their son coming home. Think about it. What would you do? Honestly, you don't know the rest of the story. But then Jesus, okay, he was creating this story in order to make a very emotional point. No one would agree with his point if he had just started with the point to begin with. But he says this next. He says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, filled with, and don't get ahead if you know the story here. Pretend you're not hearing this for the umpteenth time if you've never heard it before. Jesus turns to his audience, right? If he would have said, and filled with, you fill in the blank. Everybody in Jesus' audience at this point, no doubt, would have said what? Give me a word. What would you think? Anger. Yeah. Mad. Furious. Resentment, anger, all of that, right? Because how dare this son humiliate the father, humiliate the family this way, and show back up? We don't even know why he's coming back yet, and you might know because you know the story, but the father in the story doesn't even know why the son's coming back yet. And so this is about to get good. And when the father who sees the son, who's done what this son has done, there's only one thing really rationally to be filled with, like righteous indignation, anger. Jesus says while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion. He ran to his son, didn't even wait for him to get there, didn't even wait for him to cross the gate. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. And now everybody listening to Jesus' story is confused. Because those that have heard Jesus teach know that every time, okay, when Jesus goes on these parables and talks about these crazy kind of stories, somebody in the story represents one of us, somebody in the story maybe represents God, and up to this point, okay, I was pretty sure the father represented God, and this kid is about to get what he deserves, but suddenly this father, who I thought was representing God in this story, throws his arms around this very undeserving son who's done everything possibly that he could do to embarrass the father. So now everybody in Jesus' audience is confused. And so the son starts this little speech that he's been rehearsing all the way home. He said to him, Father, I've sinned against you, both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Okay, this is where the story can start to even bother me, because before the son can even finish his prepared speech, father interrupts him, right? Father says to the servants, quick, go get the finest robe in the house, put it on him, get a ring for his finger, sandals for his feet. All that just kind of represents sonship again, right? We're not just accepting him back. We're affirming him as who he is, right? And kill the fatted calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. Now, okay, this can be bothersome because I think most of us would say if we're just hearing this, okay, well, I want to see where this is going. Let's see if, okay, even if the Father is welcoming and forgiving, let's at least see if the Son is sincere. What are his motives here, right? What's he up to? Let's put him on probation or something. Just kind of let him work through this over time. And don't you dare go tell Mom that he's back yet, because, you know, she could get all graced out. And next thing you know, we're going to be having a party. So let's give this some time, right? That's what we would do. Let's see if he's real. Let's see if he's really repentant, or maybe if he just ran out of money and now he needs me again, and here he comes again, right? But the Father in Jesus' story treats the Son as a son. Why? Because that's who he still is. And okay, if you grew up in Sunday school and maybe this is where the story ended, you know, I remember the flannel graph, right? We just kind of prayed and went home. It's a great story of repentance. It's forgiveness. It's acceptance. It's all those things we want, coming home. And if you've never been to a church maybe where you heard the prodigal son, this may be even the only part you ever heard. But in the beginning, okay, Jesus said there was a man with how many sons? I just gave you the answer, 2 sons. And the firstborn, all right, the good son, stereotypically, the behavior, right, the guy, he's doing what the firstborn does. He's working, he's finishing up his day. And, okay, so he and his servants, I kind of picture them, they're coming back to the house, ending their day, and there's like dancing, and there's like dust getting kicked up in the house, and there's music. And it looks like people are kind of coming in from the community for something. And it's like, what? Somebody killed the fatted calf. They're rolling it out on the cart. And, you know, my dad's going to get ticked because they were supposed to be saving that for like my graduation or something, right? Or wedding or birthday. But wait a minute, okay? Something's going on. And so the servant goes out. If you read the story, okay, the son asks, what's going on back at the house? The servant says, oh, well, your brother's back. Really? Well, okay, well, I would probably expected to see him the one hog-tied on the cart. Then Dad gets a hold of him, right? Well, no, yeah, your brother's back and your dad's actually throwing a party. He's invited everybody to come over, and he wants you to get cleaned up, come on into the house, and celebrate with everybody. Okay, and all of a sudden, everybody in Jesus' audience immediately identifies with the older brother. That's what we do, because if my little brother does that to my dad, one, it makes me look really good, right? And I also know how I would feel towards him. And so Jesus says, all right, let me just go ahead and put the word that you were thinking in your mouth. The older brother was angry, ticked, and wouldn't go in. All right, so now let me ask you a question, right, and then I'm going to wrap this up. Have you ever met any angry Christians? Yeah, I know it's a stretch. But, you know, some of you, maybe you grew up with, like, maybe an angry nun or, you know, an angry pastor even. Ever watch, like, some television preachers? You can watch them and just kind of wonder, like, why are they so mad all the time? I've had people ask, why is he so grumpy? Have you ever known anybody that maybe left a church or left religion because they were just tired of being around angry, you know, disputatious Christians, I've heard them called? You know, you ever feel like they're just mad at the world? They just got to have something to be against. They just got to have something to be ticked about. You know, I don't know if they're resentful. I don't know what it is. They just kind of, they talk about hell. It's almost like they're happy that everybody else is going there or something, right? Because they're right. Well, what's up with these angry Christians? Why are they against everything? I feel like they're against me, but, you know, I thought Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. I mean, anybody tell them that? This is the older son, okay? He was angry. He wouldn't go in. So let's just try to summarize all this so we can know how this applies to us then, how we can relate to this. Okay, you got a dad throwing a party, invites the community. There's dancing and singing, a lot of people involved here. He's killed the fatted calf, big celebration then. And on one side of the house, you've got his son who doesn't even feel like he deserves the party. And on the other side of the house is the other son, the older son, who agrees that this son does not deserve this party. They represent these two groups that Jesus is talking to here, right? It's brilliant. You know, and maybe you're in one of these groups listening to this today. Neither one of these sons even wants to be at this party that the dad is throwing. You realize that? But there's the dad that's just kind of like, I just want to be happy again. I just want to celebrate. I just want, you know, this is what makes me truly happy. And everybody in Jesus' audience is so confused because none of them really understood, obviously, what God the Father is really like and how God looks at broken, lost people. And this is what Jesus wants them and us to understand very, very clearly. And so instead of just saying it, Jesus knew his audience wouldn't just believe it if he said it. He continues, because the older brother had a little speech too, right? His father came out and begged him, come on in. But he replies, no. And here's why. He said, all these years I've slaved for you. Maybe that's been your religious experience. You felt like it's been a slave kind of a thing. And you never once, he said, refused to do a single thing you told me to. I never refused anything. And in all that time, you never even gave me one little goat for a feast with my friends. Yet, when this son of yours, he wouldn't even call him his brother, this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fatted calf? Now, okay, can I pick at some of you just a bit? If you are an angry Christian, you know why you're an angry Christian? Or why you might be an angry Christian? And you probably get mad at me because you're an angry Christian. I don't care, but let me tell you why you're angry. Because you think you deserve something from God that somebody else might get. It's that simple. Wrestle with it, all right? And the holier you get, the angrier you get, right? Because I deserve it more. And I'll tell you why. It's because you're not getting this. You're living this. And every time you hear about good things happening to bad people, it just like deepens your resentment. It deepens your belief in fairness, punishment. Well, one day, that's your resolve. One day they'll get theirs. And you might even find yourself secretly getting happy and rejoicing at the fact that what goes around comes around, right? So that's what I hope for. And you would have wished this parable ended, back when he was feeding the pigs and eating what they ate. The end. Because you get what you deserve. You're angry, and you might be a little self-righteous, and you're not like Jesus. And if that's you, you're not a good follower. Now, you'll be a good Christian, unfortunately, because I'm telling you, you can start a whole movement around that brand of Christianity, and we have, but you can boycott and hate on people and all kinds of stuff around that kind of Christianity, but you're not like Jesus. And so the older son says, I'm mad. I'm ticked. It bothers me. It's not fair. Look how his father responds. He says, look, dear son, you have always stayed with me. You've always been with me. Everything I have is yours. Nothing's changed. Okay, Dad, well, what's that got to do with anything, right? Son, it has to do with everything. This is what I value most. This is what Jesus wants us to understand about the Father. This is what makes him the most happy. You've always stayed with me. Everything I have is yours. I'm not going to re-split up everything again, and it's not like going to be 25% again and 30% again. I mean, son, look, you've gotten your reward too. I haven't forgotten you. You've always been with me. He says, we had to celebrate this happy day. Happy, why? Why is this so happy? Because your brother was dead. He was dead to us, and he's come back. He's come back to life. He was lost, but now he's found. He's now with us. So listen, man, I need you to come to the party. I need you to celebrate. Not because he's getting what he deserved. This isn't about his performance, okay? This is about restoration. That's what makes the Father happy, right? Restoration. He's back, and you never left. That's what makes me happy. Okay, and you know what the pullback when it comes to following Jesus a lot of times, this is uncomfortable, but this will change you. This would change us. God could not love you more, and there's nothing you'll ever do that would cause him to love you less. And you either embrace that or you push back against it, but that's the absolute truth. That's what Jesus wanted us to understand the Father's relationship us to be like. There's nothing you could do. There's no way you can deserve it more. It's not about deserving. It's not about your performance. It's about being restored. And there's nothing you could do to make God love you more because he already loves you infinitely. And there's nothing you'll ever do or ever done that could cause you to love him less or love you less. And the corollary to all this is this. Every person that you've ever met, every person that you're ever going to be eyeball to eyeball with, God could not love them more, and there's nothing he or she could do to cause God to love him or her less either. Nothing. It doesn't matter what label they wear. It doesn't matter what lifestyle they follow. Let me put it this way, okay? God never gets mad at lost things. He's just about restoring what's been lost. Okay, and think about this just logically. Neither do you. You really don't. Not at the things, right? I mean, you ever been mad at yourself for losing, I don't know, like your phone or your keys or something? Man, it's just me. But, you weren't mad at your phone because you couldn't find your phone. Why do we get mad at lost things? Where does that kind of anger come from? Let's just be brutally honest. It comes from self-righteousness. It comes from somewhere in the back of your mind that says, you know what? I've been faithful and I've done it right. And I've been to church and I showed up and here's why I deserve it. And God says, that's awesome. Keep doing that. But that's not even the issue. The issue is when you and I get this, when this works out all of our self-righteousness and gets to the heart and the root, and it's complex, I know, and you probably listen to this, and maybe you have 1,000 questions as well. Let me just say I don't have all the answers, but I know that when we get this, okay, what breaks God's heart will start to break our heart. And when we see sin and brokenness around us and in our circles and in our lives, we won't just jump to judgment and condemnation. It will break our heart as well. That will be our first move. It won't just make us angry anymore. It'll break our hearts. And listen, if as a follower of Jesus, sin and brokenness don't first break your heart, I just think you've got work to do. Because Jesus said, okay, when that son returned, there were a lot of things he deserved, but the Father's heart was filled with compassion. That was his first move. He led with love. And because his compassion never really went away, as offended as I'm sure that father probably was by what that son did, he still led with love and compassion. He was not living in denial about the hurt and the offense. But Jesus looks at these self-righteous Pharisees in the crowd and then again to the unrighteous tax collectors and notorious sinners and says, listen, wherever you are, God couldn't love you anymore. And there's nothing you can do to make him love you less. And you know why we push and push and push even as a church? You know why we spend so much of our time and energy encouraging you to find some practical ways to go out? What does this look like to you? How do you lead with love? Why do we put that on banners and try to push that so hard around here? You know why we're spending so much energy trying to create environments where people that are far from God can come and ask their questions and where they actually want to attend and want to come back and want to be restored? You know why we're trying so hard to even redirect our focus away from what our community thinks we're against and more towards what we're for? You know why? Because when Jesus said that the Father wanted to throw a party, it wasn't around the people that were consistently faithful. That wasn't who the party was even for. It was about somebody who wasn't, but who's now back with us. And he didn't have to get cleaned up first, and he didn't even have to pay back the offense first before being welcomed back and loved. And listen, if that bothers you, if that disturbs you, there's a part of me that's glad, because that was the goal, I think, with Jesus as well. I want you to work on that. I want you to wrestle with this, because I want us to learn together how to become more and more comfortable carrying this tension between the grace of God and the truth of God, and refuse to let go of either one. Because if you ever let go of either, you lose something. And so before I pray real quick, some of you are the prodigals, and maybe you identify with that. Some of you turned your back on God, and you know it. Some of you maybe, let me just kind of use an old-fashioned term. Maybe you're living in sin, and you know it. And there's a tension in your life, and there's something you know you should do. There's a step you should take. There's a conscious issue in your life, and you know things aren't right with you and God. And I believe God and I both would want to say to you today, come on back. From wherever you are, just come on back. Yeah, but no buts. Just come on back. Jesus wants you to know that God is not mad at you. And the reason I know that is because I'm one of them. And all of us are one of them. God's not mad at you. And I want you to know that wherever you are and whatever you're doing, whatever you have done, whatever you're coming from, whatever coming home means to you, when you come home, okay, at least at this church, we're not going to hold up this big list of things you did wrong and things you've got to make right before you can belong, because we're not the older brother. We are you. And I want us to be a church that celebrates that, full of grace and truth. So let me just pray for you. Father, I pray that however this lands with us this morning, this was a tough teaching from a very familiar story, but God, I pray that you would disturb us, that you would challenge us, that you would even cause maybe a little anger to rise in us that would point to a deeper need, something that we do care about, that passion, that burden that we need to stare in the face. God, I know this is uncomfortable for a lot of us, so I just pray that whatever we feel in this moment wouldn't just go away when we leave here today, or when we turn off that screen and get back to worrying about all the unknowns. God, would you just disturb us out of our self-righteousness? Would you disturb us out of our unrighteousness, God? And Father, for every prodigal listening or watching, I just pray that you would break them before sin breaks them. And for those of us, if we're honest, those of us that sin makes us more angry than it makes us compassionate, God, I just pray that somehow you'd work that out of us as well. I pray that we would really learn what it means to lead with love, to love others the way that you loved us. God, to break out of what makes us comfortable, to be willing to enter into the brokenness with others the way that you did. God, help us to really know what it means to live a bigger story in these confusing and challenging times. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.